Welcome back to another episode of the Loco Fit Show, where we redefine what healthy means to you. I'm your host, Laurin, and this week I'm interviewing Dr. Dom D'Agostino. Dom is an associate professor at the College of Medicine at USF. His research has specialized in developing and testing metabolic-based therapies with a large focus on ketogenic diets. Dom, thank you so much for joining the podcast. I'm so excited.
Lauren, it's been a while. It's great to be back with you.
I know. When we saw each other, I was like, wait, when is the last time I've seen you? It's been years.
And it goes back to like the fitness camps and stuff too. But
oh my gosh. Yeah, that's when we met. I was just with Dr. Joe last weekend.
Oh, really?
And it's funny, like we go back to talking about that, and like that was in 2013.
Yep.
Was the first time I ever met all you guys, and he loves to share the story. He's like, I did not even want to be in the same room with you. Like, I could not stand you. And he's like, now we're great friends. And I'm like, Joe, what? Thanks. But really excited. You have such an immense background and knowledge, and you're a part of a lot of really, really cool research that is helping a lot of people in just different communities. So give a little bit of a background on yourself and kind of just like what you do and what you guys are doing now.
Sure. Well, if I go like way back, like 30 years, oh my God, getting old. Yeah, my undergrad was in nutrition, so I was always interested in nutrition and lifting and powerlifting and training and everything. And I found that being in academia, being a student was great for fitness world because it's very structured and regimented. Yeah. So I was eating every 2 hours on the clock and kind of growing and got, the more I trained, the more I got interested in nutrition. Although the career outlook was not that great in nutrition, so I majored in biology with the hopes to go to med school. So nutrition and biology, and then I started doing undergrad research and really got into neuroscience and physiology. So put my efforts into that, and one thing led to another, and I got postdoctoral funding through the Office of Navy Research. And that steered me in the direction of using the ketogenic diet and ketones as a mitigation strategy to enhance performance resilience. So actually enhance the safety and the performance of military personnel in extreme environments is what I do. And in the first couple of years, I was developing different technologies to look at cells, tissues, and animals in these hyperbaric environments, and we were testing different things, and come to find out, and what I was studying was seizures, and I was looking at drugs, but come to find out, I took nutrition in undergrad and never learned that the ketogenic diet was the standard of care for seizures. Mm-hmm. And in the process of trying to develop the optimal strategy to prevent seizures from oxygen toxicity, which is a limitation for Navy SEAL divers, I went back to the ketogenic diet and started developing different types of ketogenic diets and also different ketogenic supplements like ketone esters and ketone salts and formulations of that, and essentially using them as like drugs, basically. So they are bioidentical molecules that we have in our body, but we can administer them and produce a state of ketosis similar to the ketogenic diet, or in 30 minutes you can look at the blood and it would look like you're fasting for 7 days, and you could administer these compounds. And they're remarkably neuroprotective, they have anti-cancer effects, they change your brain neurochemistry, which is
and
really
that's
cool.
Regardless of the type of diet that you're consuming.
That is, yeah. So that's
I
always forget to mention
it,
that, so people just say, okay, they're adding it to the ketogenic. No, so independent of the diet, ketone supplementation can be used to circumvent the diet and the restrictive nature of the diet to produce a state of therapeutic ketosis. Many people are unwilling or unable to follow a ketogenic diet. And not only our lab, I mean, there's dozens of labs now, and there's many people studying this, but ketones have, they're amazing brain energy molecules, they have anti-inflammatory effects, and they alter brain neuropharmacology in a way that reduces anxiety. So we've been focusing more on what I would call metabolic psychiatry and the anti-anxiety effects of ketones. And for example, with bipolar disorder, if a patient has that, they're actually put on anti-seizure drugs, and it changes their brain neurochemistry in a way to help manage at least the manic episode, the bipolar 1 and 2. So and that got me interested in, well, we observed, I should say my wife observed, after administering these compounds prior to doing a seizure model, that they were more calm and they didn't have a fear response. So we did studies and published studies using like an elevated plus maze and a variety of different learning paradigms and behavioral studies to show that they have less anxiety. So that was just a side thing that came out of the research that we were doing. So now we've expanded to many different applications. And as you know, cancer too. So we've published quite a few studies on that.
That's so great. I didn't even think of that as being a potential benefit.
I didn't either.
Like that's just not something, but I mean, clearly if there's one thing, if you guys listen to the show, you know that we talk a lot about mental health, with Rick, and then just in general with some of our other episodes. And it really is so important. And even if you're not diagnosed with anxiety, true anxiety, like you still have anxiety, you know what I mean? To some type of a degree. So really interesting how this diet and just ketones in general, right? And we should specify whether it's ketone supplementation or a ketogenic diet. Both of these things can, impact like just so many different facets. So let's just talk about that in general, because I think that a lot of people hear about a keto diet and it's one of the things that has gotten so misunderstood, I think, right? Like, I mean, it has gotten blown out of proportion in so many ways.
In the fitness world.
Yes. Definitely not the research world. Yeah, like I said, the research world, like what you do and all the people that you know, it's very clear. With the fitness world, it's gotten a little...
Another world.
Oh my gosh, with anything, right? But I sent, the coaches, we have a group text, and I sent them the other day. It was like a keto recipes, right? And it was basically like they had chicken breast, which I'm like, okay, why do you have chicken breast? Like just use chicken thighs, right? Like why do you even eat chicken breast? And they lathered it with like, butter, bacon, cheese, all these different things. And then they paired it with like potatoes. And they were like, look at this keto meal. And I'm like, you're completely missing the point. So let's define...
The definition is important.
Yes, let's define ketogenic diet, put some parameters around it. And then what are some of the benefits and what population does this benefit the most? And like you said, I mean, there's some things that we don't even know about, like potentially anti-anxiety benefits. But let's put some parameters around it first.
Sure. Well, the ketogenic diet, and this will resonate with the fitness community and the macro counting community, is the ketogenic diet is a macronutrient ratio that, when eaten, produces a state of ketosis defined by an elevation of urine, blood, or breath ketones. So we produce ketones when glucose availability is limited, or we're fasting. That's another way to produce ketosis, or exogenous ketones, and we can talk about that later. But the elevation of ketones is really to preserve and maintain brain energy metabolism, because in the absence of glucose from carbohydrates, the body starts burning fatty acids at an accelerated rate in the liver. And the acetyl-CoA gets shuttled into ketones, which spill into the circulation, and these provide energy for the brain and the heart and the muscles. So it's the only diet that we know of that's defined by an objective biomarker that we can measure. So that makes it kind of unique to study, and very interesting to study from a scientific perspective, because there are different types of ketogenic diets. There's a clinical ketogenic diet that's upwards of about 90% fat, that's used for pediatric epilepsy. And then on the other end of the spectrum, there's the modified Atkins diet or modified ketogenic diet, which is like a 1.5 to like 1 ratio. It's about, from percentage of fats, it's upwards about like 60% fat. It can be upwards of like even 30 or 40% protein. And that's kind of like the diet that the fitness community follows. And that's actually, interestingly enough, only over the last probably less than a decade has that diet also been shown to have anti-seizure effects, and is actually used in adults in modified Atkins. So Dr. Eric Kossoff at Johns Hopkins sort of did studies and advanced that. I think that was around 2008 to 10. We realized that the ketogenic diet does not have to be super strict to have anti-seizure, effects as a metabolic therapy. So in our studies too, we amp up the protein. So instead of the 10%, even in our mice studies, we amp it, we double that. And so we have what I call, I never really labeled it as this, but a protein-sparing modified ketogenic diet. And if you want to extend that more, it's a protein-sparing modified supplemented ketogenic diet. So the types of fats that we put in it are like MCT oil, which converts to ketones, and a higher ratio of like omega-3 fats and less omega-6.
The thing too, I've seen this anecdotally with clients, and maybe you've seen this as well, maybe not with mice, but when people are resistance training or have more muscle mass in general, they typically are able to handle more protein, sometimes even more carbs, right, to where they're still in ketosis. Would you say that that's you see that as well, or I just happen to see the few people that happened with?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're in a calorie deficit, you're
Calorie
kind of
deficit is already going to be,
like you could be on a high carb diet technically. You could be eating 1,000 calories of carbohydrates a day, but if you're in a calorie deficit, you could be in a state of ketosis. So I think I don't think most people know that, but even people who study ketogenic diets know that, because it is really dependent upon being in a calorie deficit, because you'll be mobilizing fat. You could just eat just all carbohydrates, but if you're in a calorie deficit, you are burning fat eating all those carbs. If you create a calorie deficit, you're mobilizing fat for fuel. The fat goes to the liver. It gets in part turned into ketones. So that's possible. And yeah, I know people that are, that have a lot of muscle, that are very active. They can get upwards of 100, even 260 grams of carbs, I think is the highest I saw from guys. And these are guys that didn't have a lot of muscle, but they had they were preparing for Ironman and putting out 6 hours of energy a day, or 6 hours of activity, and they were maintaining 3 millimolar ketones,
and that's pretty good.
Over 200 grams of carbs a day. Yeah, just because their output was so high.
So high. So that's going to be obviously very
energy maintenance. Yeah. And actually, I should put this in the context. They were not in a calorie deficit, meaning that they were getting in enough calories to sustain their body weight over months, and they were still in a state of ketosis with over 200 grams of carbs a day. So that is possible.
It's so interesting because it really does depend on your activity level for so many different things, right? Yeah. Not even just resistance training, but just being active, right? Okay. Somebody who's really sedentary, I'm a big proponent of having carbohydrates in the diet for certain people. If somebody is completely sedentary, it's you technically really don't need many carbohydrates, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And a lot of people who are going to be sedentary are in this place where they're consuming a lot of carbs and a lot of fats together with very minimal protein and little to no movement. It's this is what is creating the problem, you know what I mean? And obviously the fitness world has completely gone mad with vegan or keto or carnivore or all carb or whatever it is, and you're hey, we should be focusing more our efforts, not necessarily just on the method, but what are we getting people to do, and let's actually look at the individual. So I think that's such an interesting point though, that you said that somebody can truly be producing ketones depending on their output and depending on the nature of, is this maintenance, is this a deficit, and that's going to look very different for everybody. Most people that I'm working with are the people that I have used a keto diet with are women who are smaller, who are competing, right? So that's going to be a little bit different. And not even just competitors, but just maybe on the smaller end. So they're not ever going to be tolerating 200 carbs and being in ketosis, but that is possible, right? Shoot for the stars, guys. But doing things, obviously fasting windows can certainly probably improve that.
Yeah,
Would you agree?
You get more metabolic switching, showing that if you're following, even if you just do a low carb diet and you're doing intermittent fasting 18 hours a day or something like that, you typically have low to moderate ketones throughout the last 4 to 6 hours. Okay. Especially if you couple that with a low carb diet. So if you could do low carb, you could do ketogenic intermittent fasting where you're in ketosis during the diet too, and you're following that. And I do that sometimes too, but if I intermittent fasting and ketogenic diet are fantastic for weight loss and weight maintenance, I would like to add, and we can get into appetite control. But a unfortunate side effect of that is that you lose weight. It's hard to gain weight. It's hard to maintain weight. I mean, I don't know, you probably remember, I was 20 pounds heavier now. And maybe I used to just be 230 for a long time. And when I switched to ketogenic diet, I wasn't as hungry, and it's just a matter of, I could get there, but I would have to eat a lot more food, and I'm not willing or able to, eat that amount of food. So a lot of people will say, the ketogenic diet is definitely not optimal for gaining muscle, but I would say that you can maintain muscle. But if appetite is a thing for you, if your appetite is not high and you have fast metabolism, it's going to be hard to maintain your weight.
Yeah, part of it too is the lifestyle you said. There's so many people who, when people talk about, I can't gain weight, and I'm listen, you've never been around somebody who is actively trying to gain weight, because it is possible, but it is literally a job. It is a job to eat enough food for certain people to gain weight and to gain muscle, not just to just gain a bunch of adipose tissue. But so for populations, we just talked about one, okay, appetite regulation, ketogenic diet, or just a low carb, modified kind of diet can be really, really great. Do you think that side tangent, a regular diet with the ketone supplements, does that moderate appetite? Have we seen that, or has that not been looked at yet?
Yeah,
anecdotally, even in yourself.
I would say more than 50% of the research that we do is actually using ketone supplementation.
Okay.
So animals, rats eating a standard rodent chow, high carb, and So
that's so interesting. I really didn't think that it was that. I thought they were kind of just like hit or miss. Well, but it's probably the dosing, like every other supplement in the entire world.
Dose. And when you take a standard high carb diet, like a rodent chow, and then you integrate the ketone supplement into it, it changes the taste. So we started seeing our animals, lose, and then they maintain about 10% less. But then we started doing gavage studies where we administer it sort of just like a tube feeding kind of thing. And then we see that too. We see a lowering of blood glucose, and then they regulate their appetite in a way. So the ketones probably go to the brain and they change. As you know, the mechanisms that regulate hunger are incredibly complex, right? So I'm just coming out of a lab meeting now where we're talking about our VMDK mice, and they're like the couch potato mice. And to get them, they stop breeding when they get real fat because they get insulin resistance, and then they get infertile, and then they won't reproduce. Hilarious. They won't do the deed. So what we do to get them mating again, actually, we do intermittent fasting and we restrict their calories to bring their weight down. Well, we can do that too. But and then they start. If you restrict your calories, they get a lot more active and they get a lot more frisky, right? So the person maintaining this, not to throw anyone under, but was fed them accidentally, and they ended up gorging on the food, and they reversed. And this goes back to dieting, right? And you can diet for 2 or 3 months and reverse all that in 2 or 3 days. So we had someone who was taking care of our animals that basically put in way too much food, they gorged themselves, and they just blew up to huge. These are mice that have behavioral eating disorders, and they were just, so now we're kind of screwed and we're trying to figure out what to do, that the animals went binging because they're couch potatoes that would overeat in the presence of food.
Oh my God.
And then we have to calorie restrict them to keep them frisky so they'll mate. And then, we had a staff member who just was overfeeding them, and they just literally, they had ad libitum food and they just blew up, and we went in there and they were just huge, fat, they could barely walk. So now we have to.
What is the mechanism, what genetically is missing, or is?
What's missing is actually for these particular mice that their mitochondria are very sluggish. So they do not have as robust mitochondrial activity. Yeah. They're more prone to getting cancer. We believe that cancer is in part, it's a metabolic but also a genetic epigenetic disease. But because they have less robust mitochondria, the mitochondria are not only the powerhouse of the cells, but they're involved in every different, they even make neurotransmitters like monoamine oxidase, for example. It's producing the mitochondria. So the mitochondria play a really important role, and if they can't maintain high levels of energy, then that the fidelity of the nuclear genome is dependent upon high energy status of the cell. So if a cell is in an energetic crisis, then the DNA repair mechanisms are not as robust, and you're more likely to get mutations, and then that can start to convert a normal cell into a precancerous cell into a cancerous cell, right? So we see that more in this animal phenotype. So their mitochondria are sluggish, they tend to overeat, which actually further damages their mitochondria. So just an interesting sidebar, because we're trying so hard to get these mice to mate, and we do it by fasting them a little bit.
Binge eating.
And then they totally binge eat. Not all mice are like that, just like people, right? Yeah. I mean, people have different
that's why I wondered, what is either missing or mutated or whatever it is. Because I know what's the one mouse that's I guess this
the DBDB or the obesity mouse, with leptin.
I was I don't think it's that one. Okay.
There's a variety of different, and as rodents age too, they tend to get fat. If they have ad libitum access to food. So
you can mirror that to people. So appetite regulation, ketogenic diet could be great for. You mentioned briefly cancer. So obviously we touched on this before. What do we think some of the proposed mechanisms there might be? And again, is that just the diet, or the diet and the supplementation, just supplementation? What are we seeing with that with cancer?
Well, that's a big topic.
Yeah,
I'll
of course,
sum it up.
yeah. Quick summary.
I kind of like.
You're like, okay, let's do a 5-hour podcast on that.
I went down that path. There's many different things can cause cancer, right?
Yes.
And okay, so like chemicals in the environment, radiation, obesity, insulin resistance, inflammation, all these things. It's called the oncogenic paradox. You have multiple things that can cause the same disease. So people are trying to disentangle this. And the way that the mainstream, most cancer biologists think that, well, you just, all these things are in some way damaging the DNA and activating oncogenes. So our lab and many other labs now, over the last 10 years, are really focusing on cancer metabolism. We are of the opinion that if you enhance your metabolic health and your mitochondrial function, very healthy, robust mitochondria will, and this kind of goes back to optimizing body composition, optimizing certain cardiometabolic biomarkers, reducing inflammation, things like that. If you have healthy, robust mitochondria, that will be the ultimate tumor suppressor by virtue of not only being able to make lots of ATP, the energy currency, but the mitochondria interact with the nucleus of the cell in something called retrograde response, right? So if the mitochondria become damaged, or let me take a step back, all the things that cause cancer, that could be chemicals in the environment, that could be reactive oxygen species, inflammation, and even viruses. Michael Bishop got the Nobel Prize for showing that viruses can cause cancer. All these things damage the mitochondria proportionally more than damaging the DNA in the nucleus. So by damaging the mitochondria also have their own DNA, and the DNA repair mechanisms in the mitochondria are nowhere near as robust as the DNA repair mechanisms in the nucleus. But when you damage the mitochondria, they produce proportionally less energy, ATP, and then they also start to overproduce oxygen-free radicals in the form of superoxide anion, and then that can be converted to hydrogen peroxide and hydroxyl radical. These things can then damage the nuclear genome and start to create oxidative stress, which damages our DNA, and then that kicks on oncogenes, and then the cell is sensing an energetic crisis, and many of the oncogenes activate glycolysis and are like survival pathways to convert a damaged cell. In many cases, damaged cells will die, but some of them will go on to survive on, and then they will proliferate to become cancer. So
you guys are trying to
that's a very long-winded way to say
You're
that.
trying to target before you even get there, which
Yep.
I think is probably the more appropriate approach, because obviously, once you have cancer, you need to address it, but how can we try and prevent this to the best of our ability?
I'm glad you asked, because it's super simple. Like, people try to make it complicated,
Okay.
but I actually think about it. Yeah, there's like body composition, optimize your body composition. Like, people who are overweight are not gonna like this, but I mean, if you're holding a lot of fat, that can actually increase your inflammation, that can start to dysregulate lipid biomarkers and things like that. So I think in terms of optimizing body composition and optimizing maybe about a dozen different cardiometabolic biomarkers. So we should be measuring our fasting insulin, HSCRP, which is like inflammation, hemoglobin A1C, triglycerides, HDL, LDL, things like that, are really important to measure. And in addition to like your CBC, CMP, your general blood work, so body composition, I think, trumps it all. Just like kind of calories and calories kind of trump like the food. So it's like body composition. If someone's trying to prevent cancer and they're overweight and out of shape, like just basically focusing on getting them lean and jacked. Not jacked, but lean and muscular and strong. And I think
jacked and tan, that's Dr. Dom's advice, you know what I'm saying? You guys just go lift weights.
I think we need to appreciate that, because muscle is not only like, a glucose sink, and muscle not only reflects our metabolic health, but it also produces various myokines and factors that are hormones. Mm-hmm. When we exercise, we're actually releasing hormones, IL-6 and things like that. So that's important to recognize, and we should think about functional biomarkers. So for some people, if somebody is extremely overweight or obese, it could be just walking for 10 minutes. For another person, it could be doing 30 chin-ups, right? So we should use that as a benchmark and do like an audit on ourselves to increase our form follows function, right? So our body composition, favorable body composition alterations will have a functional correlate, right? So focus on that. So that's like number one. I've never mentioned it or thought about it in that way, but the way you ask it, I think that is actually the most important. And the second would be the biomarkers that I mentioned, like blood pressure. I didn't mention that. Blood pressure, and then blood biomarkers would be top of the list. Would be, we believe HSCRP is a really good marker, and I actually saw that in metabolic psychiatry. So if you have, and that can actually go to your gut microbiome. So people who have irritable bowel syndrome are more likely to have a psychiatric problem, and it's a bidirectional comorbidity. Meaning that if you have a psychiatric problem, you're more likely to have IBS, and if you have IBS, so this is really,
I see that one a lot.
Taught about this in the GI physiology section, and I didn't even know that it was like a bidirectional, but like it's like
I didn't know either.
Everybody knows that now,
but I've seen that with my clients, like a lot of people who have severe gut distress, name whatever we want to call it.
There's Crohn's, ulcerative colitis. There's a lot of different things, and there's different treatments for that.
But they typically have some type of either underlying trauma that hasn't been addressed, or they have some type of very severe negative stress perception, and they've had this for years and years. And it's like I was like, why do all my super, super high stress clients have these gut problems? And I was like, after a certain amount of times, you're like, this isn't just a coincidence. It's really interesting that it is bidirectional, because of course there's going to be, some type of effect whenever you're going to have these gut issues. Then of course your mood state and your mindset around everything. That's so fascinating.
Traumatic psychological trauma can produce rapid gut permeability at the level of the tight junctions, and these tight junctions that are part of the network that holds the endothelial cells together in your gut are also tight junctions in the blood-brain barrier. So, and it also correlates with the level of systemic inflammation. So when someone has systemic inflammation, that's actually causing it could be gut dysbiosis. There's like the chicken and the egg thing, but you could say this, and I think we know this, that psychological trauma can cause gut dysbiosis, which causes gut permeability, an increase in gut permeability. And when we have an increase in gut permeability, that's at the level of the tight junctions, and there's certain factors that regulate that. And now we know that increase in inflammation will cause neuroinflammation, because the same tight junctions are on the blood-brain barrier. So if we have systemic inflammation, that causes permeability at the level of the gut-brain barrier. Those cytokines, chemokines cross over into the brain, and that neuroinflammation can produce headaches, it can produce brain fog, it can produce many different things that can trigger a psychiatric event. If someone's borderline bipolar, it can exacerbate that. So that's why there's fluctuations of it. Can trigger depression. So inflammation in the brain is directly correlated to inflammation in the body, and then not all the time. Sometimes you could have neuroinflammation if you have like a virus, that harbors in the brain. But we can say that systemic inflammation will produce neuroinflammation, and that could exacerbate a psychiatric disorder, from depression to bipolar to schizophrenia. Like, we know this now.
Wow, this is so crazy, because these are things that I've seen, but it's so interesting when you actually understand the mechanism and not just like, I think I'm seeing this kind of trend. Like, this is, and I had no idea the tight junctions of the gut that would correlate with that makes so much sense. Like, wow, so many things are just coming together. So, okay, so there's so many different reasons as to why we should have this a check. And I have to shout out my friend, Dr. Gabrielle Lyon. She does an amazing job of talking about, muscle mass being super important. And, a lot of people hear muscle mass, like, you need to get leaner, you need to get more muscular, and they think of a bodybuilder. It's like, but that's not what we're talking about. But she always says, like, muscle is the longevity organ. And because we are very not just over fat, but under muscled. And what we talk about a lot on this podcast is the effects of chronic dieting. Every time you're chronic dieting, you're building up these metabolic adaptations and these hormonal adaptations, and you're losing muscle mass in the process, and you're gaining body fat preferentially. And so every time you do this, now you're gaining body fat and losing muscle mass, and that's why you're not only ending up fatter, like in a body fat perspective, so you're not happy with how you look, but you're also metabolically a lot worse off. So that's what we're really trying to work on, is like we need to like nail these things, because the chronic dieting cycles are putting people in such a terrible position, and this has nothing to do with what you want to look like, right? I mean, obviously, you can choose how you want to look and what you want your physique to look like, but from a health perspective, like down the line, like it's going to catch up, and it catches up pretty quick, and kind of like brain neuroplasticity declines with age, right? We have to work a lot harder to learn new things after the age of 25. Same thing with muscle mass. Like you're not just gonna like all of a sudden be like 50 years old and just get like jacked out of nowhere, right? Like the people who we see who are like that have been lifting for a long time. So it's like the earlier we can get people started to do this and focus on it, like the better. So there's so much great stuff coming out, and I absolutely love this. And some things that you've mentioned before, and I've saw it on your site, and I see it a lot of places, and I think that again, kind of like the ketogenic diet, this has been very misunderstood. So insulin sensitivity and metabolic flexibility.
Yeah.
What do these actually mean? Like, let's put some parameters around here, and why are these terms important?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'd like to add to that, and that leads into this, that muscle is like metabolic currency. So we want to build as much as possible. So that's why, I mean, students out there, it's a great time to live, because the structure of academia and student life really favors. I just remember, going to a 2-hour class and then have 2-hour breaks where I would just eat, fit in a workout, go to class, then eat, and
I used to do 2 days every day for like years.
Gaining so much muscle, and plus you're like 18, 19, 20. It's like you just look at weight and food. But it did, it really was dependent upon eating massive amounts of food and protein, which is probably not the best thing you want to do for longevity. But so the question
there is a point, right?
Yeah.
But we can touch on that too really quick before we get to this. So I know a lot of people talk about, like mTOR, you don't want to have this too high, because that's going to, conflict. Like that's going to make you age more rapidly, right?
Yeah.
And then I think people hear that and they think, oh, well, I don't want to have any muscle then, because I don't want to spike mTOR, all these different things. And it's like, well, like how do we balance those two aspects, or is there really a, because what's the guy who's really big in all that, the aging stuff?
Peter T.
Peter T is one. No, this guy, I don't know as much about him, but I would.
David Sinclair.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
And he talks a lot about that, and I was like, well, I understand where he's coming from, but I was like, I feel like a lot of people are going to misinterpret this to be like, oh, I don't want to get a lot of protein and I don't really need to lift. And it's like, I get like that calorie control and being in an optimal body composition is important, but also I don't think we should be steering people away from protein and muscle mass.
No.
And that's maybe not what he's saying. I don't want to like misquote him by any means, but.
Yeah, this is an important topic, and I think there's a lot of confusion around it. It would not serve me well to try to go back to 230 pounds. The amount of food and protein that I would need to consume is stress on the organ systems, and could potentially, I don't believe this, but in some theories, that could make you susceptible to cancer. Mm-hmm. So I think maintaining a weight that you can manage and muscle, I think it really comes down to function too. And as far as like being able to lift your body weight for a certain amount of reps, or deadlift, if you can do 3 times your body weight for reps, I mean, that's like part of like,
I'm going to die tomorrow. Oh my God.
Actually, I mean,
no way. 3 times.
Yeah, like, I mean, back when, I was training with Lane, I weighed 225, but I could do 675 for reps. And I don't weigh that much anymore. But so I lost 20 pounds, but if I
feel like just casually I used to do 675 for reps.
But what I'm saying is like, it's the total, it's not, I don't focus on the total amount of weight now. I focus on power to weight ratio, I guess, if you want to put it in that terms. So now I can do much more chin-ups, I can do much more push-ups, and now my body weight's less, so I probably, if I trained, I could probably do that amount of body weight, X amount of times. So I think we should look at it from that perspective, and not just, I mean, the mentality I had when I was younger is just eat as much as I can, lift as heavy as I can. That, the body can't tolerate that. I mean, I'm, well into my mid-40s, approaching 50s, and I could not tolerate that. So I've gravitated to doing, I still train heavy, but I think to eat, and this goes back to the original question, is it healthy to try to consume as much protein as possible to optimize and maximize skeletal muscle mass. And I think there's a point of diminishing returns, right? So I think you probably don't want to be more than like 20% above your ideal body weight, even if you are super lean. Because if you're holding that amount of muscle, that necessitates for the large majority of people to consume an overabundance of calories and protein, which over a protracted period of time is putting stress on the organs. It's like my liver enzymes, they were never out of range, but they were on the higher end of normal when I was younger. I started getting blood work when I was like in my teens. I took the drug Accutane for like acne. So I started getting blood work. I was like, oh, this is interesting to look at my blood work. So I just was like, oh, I'm just going to keep going back. I did like a half cycle of that and worked for the acne, but I kept going back and getting blood work every year because I was really into nutrition and biology.
What did they need to look at for that?
For what?
For Accutane.
Like, I think it's this goes back a long time. This is back in the early 90s, but like your liver enzymes.
Oh,
like
okay.
that
I didn't know it was that. I know it was pretty harsh. But
yeah, it's just like standard, like,
okay.
you want to get blood work for that. So I got very interested in like looking at my own blood work. So I always asked the doctor, even as a teenager, hey, can I have a copy of my blood work? And I did notice that my AST was always a little bit higher, but that's because if you're working out, that enzyme is in skeletal muscle, it's in the heart, it's in areas, whereas ALT is more of a liver-specific enzyme and that. But I noticed both of those things came down considerably when I started to do intermittent fasting, calorie restriction, and my weight came down. So pretty much and it's not like I was fat when I held a lot of muscle, but just bringing your body weight down, consuming less food is less stress on. And I think David Sinclair is of the opinion, stay as low as protein as possible to keep your muscle, but up to a certain point, right? I'm of the opinion that, if we want to do it, put a number to it, like 1.5 grams per kilogram, upwards of 2 to 2.2 grams per kilogram, if you're training and you have a lot of muscle, is okay. But I was like way off the spectrum. I was getting like, I was like double, like sometimes 400 or 500 grams protein a day when I was younger. Yeah, I was eating a lot. I would have I would cook 2-pound London broils and then cook that, and then I would drink a Metrix with HMB in between.
Oh, HMB! Oh man!
And then I was eating sweet potatoes and pasta and everything on top of that. But
yeah, it's a whole different world especially for men, right? I would coach a lot of women, but I do work with men as well. And in order to gain that size, and it really does need to be something that is finite. You have to say, okay, I want to be a competitive athlete for this many years, whether you're a bodybuilder or a powerlifter, because those two things are very hard on your body. Of course, if we talk about the drug side of things, that amplifies everything times 100, right? But especially if you're consuming a lot of food and you're heavier than you should be, and you're taking drugs, which again, totally your preference. But those things do have to have a time course to where you say, you know what, I did what I wanted, I got to pack it in, because there's a lot of negative side effects that are going to happen. And to be honest, like when you're pushing your body that hard, you can really only perform at that level for so long, especially when we're talking about like powerlifting, because it's like it's just brutal on people's bodies, like all the injuries and everything.
And the drugs on top of that. But I think when you're younger and you're doing that, and I think all the exercise you're doing, especially cardio, is reversing all that toxicity that's happening from not only food, but all the drugs too. But I mean, there's quite a few bodybuilders. I was listening to Dorian Yates. It was like came through my scroll on my social feed, and it was something about the dangers of drugs and everything, but and all the bodybuilders that have died, using the drugs. But
have you seen like him lately now? Like he's like a yogi, and he's like I mean, he works out, you know what I mean? But he's just like all into like psychedelics and like yoga, and like he's at a very normal body weight. And I'm like, you did that right, you know what I mean? Like you were a monster, like you were super competitive, like you trained your ass off, but then you transition to this life to where you're like, now I'm a healthy individual, And I think at least from what I've seen, a lot of it too is the dehydration and the diuretics. Like that really fucks people.
Yeah. Like cardiac effects, like if you manipulate potassium.
People are doing that like harshly, you know what I mean? And now we're even seeing more women dying because of that. Of course, in like the physique and the bodybuilding side of it, not necessarily like bikini and figure, but to get this certain look, people will do anything, and it's like, I get it, like you want to be competitive, but like people are literally dying from all these diuretics.
Yeah.
People just compounding them and not knowing, and also taking all this other stuff on top of it, not just the diuretic, but cutting water and adding potassium, and just like, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
So insulin sorry, I kind of derailed us a little bit. Insulin sensitivity and metabolic flexibility.
Yeah. So training, like the biggest way to increase insulin sensitivity, there's a lot of chatter about diet and this and that, is to a caloric deficit and physical exercise will dramatically increase insulin sensitivity, right? No matter what diet you're eating. I am of the opinion that keeping carbohydrate threshold to where you keep your body always a little bit hungry for carbohydrates, like tight, and that may be 400 grams of carbs for somebody, and 60 grams of carbs for another person who's like carbohydrate intolerant. But you have to find the number, and I think the best way to figure out your carbohydrate threshold would be to measure fasting insulin for one thing, but to wear a continuous glucose monitor. So I got one on the back of my arm now. And looking at the glycemic response to the meal that you're eating. Like some people have no idea that they eat, 40 grams of rice or whatever, and they're going up into the mid 200s. If you keep these postprandial excursions in glucose will trigger inflammation, and it'll trigger all sorts of things that are not good over time. So I think the tighter we can keep glycemic variability and minimize glycemic variability, that can probably play into improving insulin sensitivity. But it really comes down to just like calories, really, and just the biggest factor associated with calories would be the macronutrient, would be carbohydrates. So actually adjusting carbohydrates to optimize and reduce glycemic variability. And that could be as simple as actually the order in which you eat your food is important. If you have protein, starch, and fiber, for example, eating a salad with an olive oil dressing and then eating your protein, eating your potato at the end will produce a different metabolic response and a different effect on your glycemic variability than if you had the potato first and then ate the salad, then ate the steak.
Really?
Yes.
Which one's better?
Eating protein, fiber, and fat first,
Okay.
and following that up with your carbohydrates would actually attenuate the glycemic response and even the area under the curve of the glycemic.
That's so
variability.
Interesting.
For most people, there's a couple publications on this.
There might be variation, but
I have a mentoring for med students, and we're doing a scoping review on the use of continuous glucose monitors in non-diabetics, because this is a big hot topic now in athletes and understanding. I think there's a lot of insight, but it becomes astronomically more insightful if you were to look at that glycemic variability and, for example, get daily insulin measurements and measure other metabolites.
The insulin measurements are from that too?
No, there's no continuous.
Okay. I was like, whoa.
But if you couple it,
strap one of those on me right now. I want to know.
But if you measure, Abbott actually came out with a Lingo device, which is glucose, beta hydroxybutyrate, lactate, and that could be important for athletes, and also measures blood alcohol. So having all four, those things measured, would be very useful.
Yeah. What have you noticed for you personally, which is going to be different for everybody, but what have you noticed spikes your glucose the most? Just out of pure curiosity.
Actually, training real heavy, even on a ketogenic diet. If I was just to go all out set of deadlifts, especially high rep deadlifts or squats or something like that, that's breaking down muscle glycogen, enters circulation.
Yeah.
Gets converted back, or the lactic acid goes to the liver through the Cori cycle, makes more glucose. But it's basically glycogenolysis, gluconeogenesis, things kick in when you start working out. So. But on a ketogenic diet, it's very boring. I could show you right now, my CGM response is a flat line.
Yeah.
So,
do you still drink alcohol?
I do. I have, not every night, but I cap it to, if I have more than one, I just don't feel good. I feel like someone hit me over the head with a sledgehammer in the morning. But I have one glass of dry farm wines. Okay. So dry farm wines are dry. They basically have less than 1 gram of sugar per bottle. And there's all different kinds, there's whey, and they come from small farms that don't use pesticides and things. So It's kind of like a brand that I support, and
I remember that was in like one of the conferences I was at. I remember they were there, or they gave wine out or something.
Oh yeah, they're super generous. So
Yeah.
we just hosted the Metabolic Health Summit in Santa Barbara. Actually, we had great speakers. Colin Chant talked about the importance of muscle for cancer, like preventing and cancer outcomes, and Dr. Tommy Wood just talked about muscle in general and how muscle improves insulin sensitivity, metabolic health, and longevity. But anyway, getting back to Dry Farm Wines, they actually supplied like wine throughout the whole event, and you know, in a conscientious, like in a manner that wasn't making everybody drunk. But it's a health conscious event, and you know, if you responsibly administer it, people realize.
Yeah, I love, everybody who's listening knows this, I love wine, so I was just interested if it does.
I love some,
if it does impact that. I will know, so I wear an Oura ring, I know you support them as well. So I'm somebody who tolerates alcohol very well. Like, I'm just super Irish, no problem. I metabolize
What about your
very
sleep,
quickly.
if you have it at night?
I honestly, it's only after like a lot. And usually actually what influences my sleep the most is if I eat too much. My core body temp. Now, if I go out like drinking, like of course, like that will increase my core body temp a lot. If I have 2 or 3 glasses of wine, I'm fine. Like there's no issue. But if I have like
3, wow.
But if I go and like really drink, right?
Like late at night. Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if I have 1, I'm okay, a small like 6 ounce. But if I have 2, I always see it on my Oura. And if I have 3, I'll definitely see it on my Oura.
Yeah, I can definitely see. Like
I never do 3, but
usually the HRV. I mean, not the HRV. Is it the HRV goes down? I think it is the HRV. HRV goes down. Usually, it's weird though. My HRV scores are so wild. Like I'll be low and then it'll spike super super high. But the average is just kind of but I'm all over the board. It's very interesting. Like my peak is very, very high, but my average is like kind of it's very weird. So you see the post there, and like that's so, like it's just everybody just looks so different.
You can't compare yourself to other people with HRV. You just have to compare yourself to yourself.
What I think is cool about the Oura Ring, or really anything that's like that, and you know, whether we're talking about Oura Ring or a CGM, or even just testing your own blood glucose, right, with the same monitor, or even the body weight scale, right, the same scale. What are the changes that you're seeing? And that's what's going to be most important, right? And we need to track those measurements and those changes. And obviously, over time with like your own at-home glucose monitor, if the strips are old, you get some wacky reading, so make sure they're not like these old trash glucose strips. But if you're using the same device, you can pretty much know, okay, this is what I'm at normally, and if I see a big deviation, then I should be, I should be concerned or whatever. Postprandial excursion is like my new favorite word. I love that you said that. I was like, this is amazing. But how
sometimes if you read like so many papers, it just becomes part of your normal language, and it's such jargon.
I know it's like bolus. If you're talking about eating like a protein serving, it's always bolus in the literature. So you're like, oh, bolus. You're like, bolus? What are you talking? What's a bolus?
And if you read enough, like I don't know, if you're doing because I'm funded by military contracts and NASA, they use so many acronyms, and you just start speaking in acronyms.
And then people are like, hey, what are you doing? But so with insulin sensitivity as well, like you talked about the walk, like the activity, and that's something that we talk about a lot is the walks, and the research on that.
Oh, right after,
the post-meal walk. Oh my gosh,
I started posting about this, and then there's a guy, Stan, Rhino, right? Yeah, I used to follow him like a long time ago. He looks like he's doing really well. Yes. I'm super impressed by his ability, like his longevity and his strength and everything else, and then his just.
And he takes care of himself. He's a huge proponent of that.
Super smart, super articulate, and kind of gives back to the community. So I just started refollowing him again. I've been following, but now like paying. So he was a big proponent, and just intuitively he knew that you eat and it's just make you feel better. It's his health, and you can validate it. I basically validated it, and it doesn't take much. Like a brisk walk with our dogs, we do that every night, like after we eat. So it makes a huge difference. People probably get so annoyed how much I talk about walking. Like I talk about walking and dopamine like so much, but like literally going for a short morning and a short evening walk. If you can time it around, getting the sun exposure, getting that movement, if you can time it around a meal for the digestion and the glucose regulation, like it really is one of the most impactful things that you can do. And everything that Dom is saying, when we're talking about longevity and health and all of this,
like these are the ways to manage it. It's not something that is so out of touch for people, you know. And I think a lot of times that we hear all this stuff and it gets really, really like nuanced and scientific, and then people are really overwhelmed. And they're like, okay, well, what am I going to do? Like all these things, I might as well just keep doing what I'm doing. It's like, no, take a few key habits from this, right? And you don't need to apply everything that we're talking about, but you can take a few things and you're going to be in a way better position. And then those things build, and then it becomes, that's just easy. That's just normal for you. You know, eating on a restricted time block, right? Like a feeding window. Something that I started to intuitively do and then started to see the research on it. And is it the most important thing? No. But is it something that if all the other boxes for me are checked, I can add this and it's easy for me? Then I do it, right? And I pretty much do that on a consistent basis outside of, you know, if I'm traveling or there's an event or something. But typically speaking, like I wait to eat my first meal and then I don't eat too late. And if I eat too late, I notice for me the biggest thing is my sleep. I get really, really hot when I eat, and like if I eat a lot, especially.
Sign of a good metabolism. You're just uncoupling your mitochondria.
That's what it is. So speaking of CGMs, I know you guys are doing some interesting research right now. I know you can't talk all about it because it's not like published quite yet. But just talk about what the study is. And I know you guys are really tying in this like mental aspect, which I think is incredible, with like, you know, eating behaviors and, you know, psychiatry and all this. Like I'm super excited that this is the direction you guys are taking some of the research, because almost everybody's affected by it, whether it's personally or they know somebody, whether it's a family member, significant other, child, whatever it is. Like this is stuff that is going to make a really big difference.
If there's one thing that I think really resonates is that metabolic health really correlates with mental health. So, you know, food affects mood, it's stated simply, and I think, you know, it's getting more attention now, and, you know, we coming out of a conference, Metabolic Health Summit, there's like a satellite conference called Metabolic Psychiatry, which is sort of laying the roadmap for this. And it kind of ties into the study that we're doing now. We have our second cohort data that we're analyzing right now, but it's the use of continuous glucose monitoring as a behavioral tool to modify eating, to optimize, you know, metabolic biomarkers and also mental health. So putting continuous glucose monitors on people to make them more aware of how food is affecting their body. And then they, by virtue of measuring and observing, so what you observe, if the person is observing their metabolism through the use of CGM, then they are more likely to change it. So if they engage with the app, if they look at their glycemic excursions in response to food, they observation basically leads to very significant beneficial outcomes. I mean, that's like pretty much anything. If you're lifting weights and you put a camera in the corner to, you know, put on Instagram squatting, you're going to get a couple, you know, I mean, this holds true in every field you can think of. If you're observing, even at the subatomic level, you know, and Heisenberg uncertainty theorem and particle physics, we know that if we observe like a particle, then it actually changes that particle. Like, I mean, so I kind of related to that. But everything we observe, if a person uses a continuous glucose monitor and observes their glycemic response in, you know, in proportion to not only the type of food that they're eating, but the amount of food too. So some people just really go crazy with the portion control, and they don't realize that the amount of food that they're eating is really setting them off, that they could have the same meal, but if they allocate it down on their plate and then put the chips or whatever back into the bin and just stick with that, then that becomes super important. So what we observed in a nutshell, and we published an abstract in FASF Journal on this, is that the use of continuous glucose monitoring has significant effect on, and this is coupled with a low carb diet and a ketogenic diet. And Dr. Allison Hull, really got to give her credit because her whole team is managing all the patients, and she's probably the best person that I have ever met that understands the science and the art of low carbohydrate ketogenic implementation. So patients come in and then they titrate and adjust the diet over the course of about a month. And we see significant, if you just radically change someone's diet, it's not going to work. You get like a rebound effect, it just doesn't work. She taught me that, and she taught me so many different things. So, we do stuff in the lab, and it's easy to put rodents on a ketogenic, and you see these remarkable effects very fast. But I realized as we transition to science to human application that it doesn't always work like that with humans. So she's got her pulse on this, and that's why I basically started working with her as a collaborator. And now she's got a position at USF too, but she's got a wellness program. Just Google Dr. Allison Hull wellness program, and you'll find lots of information. She's on the news, she's on podcasts now talking about this. But the big thing that we saw, her wellness program is incredibly effective at improving body composition, metabolic biomarkers, but the use of continuous glucose monitoring, coupled with the Levels Health app, which the Levels Health app actually gives you actionable data, similar to a macro calculator, giving you actionable data. We saw greater improvements in reversing hepatic steatosis, which is the precursor to non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and also, I guess most importantly, like beneficial changes in reduction in anxiety. We used the GAD-7 test and PHQ-9, so general mood, and sleep was improved, and the wellness program has her own sort of subjective questionnaire, so improvements across the board. The thing that I was the data that is most compelling coming out of a low carb, intervention with a continuous glucose monitor is the remarkable changes in behavior and mood. And what was really interesting is that all our subjects were non-diabetic, they were non-obese, but they all had like the precursor to fatty liver disease, like all of them almost. And this is kind of scary. We used a very skilled
what is that? How do you find that marker?
Yeah, actually, well, you can do a CT scan, which gives some radiation. So we got some pushback from the IRB doing that, but we use sort of like a high resolution ultrasound and a very good group that's very skilled at doing this. And they were able to identify and show that the people that even have no diabetes and they're non-obese, they basically have this they have hepatic steatosis. Yeah, and if you let that go untreated, you don't reverse it, then that's going to be significant consequences.
Yeah.
And it's pretty ubiquitous now. Yeah. It's like a lot of people have this. And if you do have type 2 diabetes and you're obese, and your nutrition is way off, you almost absolutely have this.
Yeah, definitely have this. And that was interesting that I was going to ask, were these diabetics? And I like that you said low carb and not necessarily keto, because again, the ketogenic diet is very challenging for a lot of people.
Extreme. Yeah, most 95% of people can't do it. No. You have to be hyper motivated.
And to be fair, it's like, okay, do they need to, right? Obviously, if you're somebody who has severe epilepsy, well, there is a difference of the diet that you probably need to follow to manage that, right? But if you're looking to manage your health and your relationship with food, maybe you don't need to do that, right? And maybe just being, low carb and having some self-monitoring things like a CGM could be really useful. And I think what you touched on was so great, because a lot of people, there's so much great research that comes out of animal models. But then I feel like a lot of times it falls flat when we do that with humans, not necessarily because the protocol didn't work, but because of the behavioral actions that people are taking, or really in this case, not taking. And it's really the behavior change literature is so challenging, right? And it is really, really hard to get people to change. First, they have to really want to change, right? That's first and foremost. So without that, you're really not going to have anything. But once somebody has decided that they do want to change, that doesn't just mean that it's going to be this easy, simple process. I mean, that's why we literally have business. It's because behavior change is challenging and people need to work through it. So that's really, I think, where a lot of times it's not necessarily that the animal data is flawed. It's more so it's not perfectly executed, because it's just nearly impossible to replicate that in individuals. You know what I mean? So we have to do the best that we can to change those behaviors first before we can even think about applying that intervention. And I like how you said she does it in this stepwise fashion to really titrate the changes, because otherwise, more science words, titrate, because otherwise it's like, it's true. If you just throw that onto people, they might do it for a week or two because they're excited. Oh, I'm on this new plan, but it's like, okay, great. What happens after you're initially motivated, or a birthday party comes up, or you want to go on a date night? What are you gonna do? If you don't have the tools or the skills, and that's why we talk a lot about not just flexible dieting as far as tracking macros, but more of having a flexible mindset. And that's really where all this comes down to. So I'm super excited that this is, becoming a really unique field, and that this is really, self-monitoring behaviors, like, mentioned, are pretty validated, but the fact that we're increasing the amount of self-monitoring behaviors, because the ones that I've seen, at least in the literature, are body weight, and like tracking your food intake and tracking exercise, of course, which are great. But this is something that is a little bit different, and very, very specific.
And it needs to be done sort of right too. So I mean, that's why we kind of hold the Metabolic Health Summit, because it's a really great event. I've been a few times. Vouch for it. You got to come to the next one. So it's science, and then we have clinicians. So there's clinical science, but it's really about moving the science to implementation, actionable implementation, to empower people and make them and give them a sense of personal empowerment, with this knowledge. And when you can put a continuous glucose monitor on someone and give them the tools where they can actually like do blood work at home and things like that, then they become an active member as part of their health. So they're taking charge of their health, and they don't. And then that empowers them, and the more they learn about it too, there's just like, the more you learn about something, the more enthusiastic you get about doing it. Like when I was learning about ketones and ketogenic diets, I actually wanted to follow the diet, so I became so interested in it. And I think that's part of the movement that we're doing with that, and also giving people tools where you don't have to feel so restricted, where they can have a Pop-Tart in the form of a legendary tasty pastry instead of a Pop-Tart, and actually start to introduce some foods that actually taste good. There's a lot of great food companies scrambling to the market and developing products that one could follow if they're doing a medical ketogenic diet, or just a low carb diet for weight loss. Like Killer Creamery makes, awesome ice cream and legendary foods, and then Keto Brick. I gave you a Keto Brick, so you can try that. That actually has like legitimate medical keto macros, and these are things that if I want something outside of just the normal, whole food meals if I'm traveling.
And I think, of course, like with anything, learning about, defining these terms are really important, like we touched on, right? Because, what bothers me so much about keto is that there's so much great stuff about it, but it gets completely misrepresented. And it'll literally be like, here's this keto product at Costco, and then I look at the person's cart, and not judging their cart, but I'm just looking, okay, you're grabbing this really high-fat product, and everything else in your cart is trash, like literally trash food. And if you're adding just this extra fat calories on top of this trash diet, you're actually going to be putting yourself in a worse position, right? Like this is certainly not useful. Like they are
calorically dense things. So, and if they're not tracking total calories, you don't know how many emails I got over the years. Especially, I think the message is starting to get out now, not fully out, but hey, I'm doing I'm doing this, and I'm like gaining weight. I'm not losing any weight. Well, what are your calories? What are your meals? Like,
I don't know.
Many people just thought, I didn't know how to do that.
And you talked about, okay, it can be really great for appetite regulation, but to be fair, that's only under the guise that somebody actually understands how to regulate their hunger and their satiety.
That's right.
So what I like about what you guys are doing, what you talked about, okay, empowering people to understand this, what that allows them to do is not just know this, obviously you're learning the knowledge and you don't have to rely on somebody else, right? But you actually are able to take note of when you feel a certain way. And that's one of the most powerful things when a client can come back and say, hey, I notice now when I eat this food, I feel a certain way. It's like, I could have told you that 100 times, but until you feel that, you're not going to want to make that change. So I think it's really important that you guys aren't just saying, hey, here's this information, do this. You're really, like you said, empowering people to understand and to use different tools to say, okay, now I can take charge of this myself. And that's really what's going to create some like long-lasting change. So we'll put the Metabolic Summit. When is that going to be again? Usually it's in the beginning of the year, right?
It just happened now, like last week. So we are organizing.
I thought it was always like, no.
Well, yeah, so we had to switch it up because of COVID. Actually, it was
Okay.
like bookended.
Okay.
The last one was like January, February 2020, and then like COVID hit as it was happening. And then, you know, we just had it now in Santa Barbara.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're talking about maybe bringing it to Tampa. So I don't know, we're still in the planning phases of that. But we did have a virtual component, and maybe, you know, depending on when this comes out, people can still access all the great talks on metabolic psychiatry, on
yeah.
muscle.
How long is that? This will be on in a few weeks. So.
Yeah. Just go to the website, metabolic.summit.com, and the virtual component, you can get CMEs or CEUs if you need that. So, and the virtual component has like a lot of, you can, instead of, you know, watching in person, you can download it and watch something, you know, and at your home, you can take it to the beach, you know, you can learn all this.
Whenever you want, yeah.
Yeah, and it's very actionable. It's not only, you know, it's very high level science too. We got, you know, Sachin Panda was talking about time restricted feeding, and Rhonda Patrick talked about the integrity of the gut microbiome and things like that. So, and then we had, you know, a lot of talks on cancer and neuroscience, and then we had a whole optimization thing about optimizing nutrition through different parameters. So
Nice. We'll definitely link that in the show notes.
Yep.
This will be coming out in a few weeks, so people can still access that. And then, where is your website or just in general, where is the best place to find more information?
Yeah, ketonutrition.org. It's a website I started a long time ago before, you know, because I was getting so many emails. So we hit on many topics. Karina actually did, a blog on time restricted feeding a long time ago. So sign up for the newsletter. I tend to put a lot of things in the newsletter that don't make it to the website. So ketonutrition.org.
Nice. And then if anybody is interested in doing a PhD with you, that would be at the College of Medicine. Right?
Yeah, USF Morsani College of Medicine. Of
that would be a PhD program. Not, you know, it would be in the med. It's in the med school, but you're not getting, you know, it's not you don't have to go to medical school. You can get a PhD. I almost said that, but I ended up with Dr. Campbell, that was an amazing thing, and I'm still so thankful for all that. Like,
he's an awesome mentor.
Oh my gosh, we're still, you know, so close. So we'll put all that information below. So this was so great. We could talk forever on all these things. I do want to be respectful of your time. So thank you again. I really appreciate it. Yeah. Well, we'll do this again for sure. We'll have to do a follow up. But thank you guys so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please share it. This is the best way to support us. For more information on one-on-one coaching, visit teamlocofit.com and be sure to join our email list for great information, first and foremost, and then also to be the first to hear about the app that we'll be releasing in a few months. So thank you guys, and we'll talk to you next week.